Welcome to Washington Talk. I'm Eun Cho. Talks between the U.S. and North Korea have reached a stalemate. While Washington is giving diplomacy a chance, Pyongyang is not coming to the table. Satellite images reveal hidden North Korean missile bases and raise doubts about Pyongyang's sincerity to give up its weapons. Is it a good idea for North Korea to drag on the process?
Between the United States and also North Korean officials. We will look forward to scheduling a meeting when the time is right.
In the studio with me today, Mr. David Maxwell, Senior Fellow at the Foundation for Defensive Democracies. Mr. Maxwell is a retired U.S. Army Special Forces colonel with command assignments in Korea. Also joining me today, Ambassador Alexander Vershbow, Distinguished Fellow at the Atlantic Council. He served as U.S. Ambassador to the Republic of Korea and was Deputy Secretary General of NATO. Welcome to the program.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Now, North Korea canceled high-level talks with the United States. Does North Korea have more to lose if this pause in talks is extended?
I think they do have a lot to lose if they continue to avoid direct engagement with either Secretary Pompeo or at the expert level with Steve Biegun. It's clear that their strategy is to play hard to get in the hope that they can get a better deal by dealing directly with President Trump. After all, it worked in Singapore. They ended up with a very ambiguous statement. And then they found that President Trump declared victory. And so he took the pressure off. So I think that if they try that again, however, President Trump will come to realize that he's been played and that Kim Jong-un is not as serious about denuclearization as he thought. And then we could get back into a downward spiral towards confrontation, fire and fury, even the talk about the military option. So the North should deal now, engage at the expert level. That's the only way to actually work out a mutually beneficial deal.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I agree. And of course, the timeline is really as long as President Trump and President Moon are in office. I mean, that's really about as much time as Kim Jong-un has, because there will probably never be a confluence of leaders and events that could potentially benefit him. But he has got to allow his negotiators to negotiate with ours, do the groundwork. Otherwise, I agree with the ambassador. President Trump is not going to make an agreement at the next summit.
Mm-hmm. How about the U.S. side? Isn't it better to be prudent than to rush into a bad deal?
Of course, nobody wants to end up with a bad deal. And I think one of the mistakes that was made in the preparation for the Singapore summit was not holding out for more of a concrete result reflected in a joint statement that would actually have some teeth and force the North Koreans to get serious about denuclearization. In effect, we made it into a giant photo op, and the pressure was actually lessened on North Korea to get serious about denuclearization. Yeah. Now, of course, it takes two to tango. The United States, I think, has been presenting the lifting of sanctions as an all-or-nothing proposition, which is also not realistic. I think the North needs to agree to a clear timeline for denuclearization, which leads to the dismantlement of their entire program with verification. But the United States has to be more explicit about what the North will get in return at each stage of this process. The old action for action principle, I think, still is the only way we're going to get to a happy ending to this story.
Mm-hmm. And that's really why we have to have working level talks, because we will continue to hear the publicly stated positions really at the extreme ends. But until the experts can work this out, there may be flexibility. And we should remember that at the Singapore summit, it really comes down to two things. Is Kim Jong-un going to make the strategic choice to give up his nuclear weapons in return for the brighter future? You know, we often laugh about the video that we saw there, but I think there's sincerity in that if Kim Jong-un is willing to make the right strategic choice, he can make a better future for the Korean people in the North.
Mr. Maxwell just emphasized the importance of the working level talks, and this week Vice President Pence in an interview, when asked if the declaration list was a prerequisite for the second North Korea-U.S. summit, he said there's not the prerequisite, but then the meeting itself, the summit itself, will produce plans to disclose North Korea's weapons and facilities. So does he mean that the two leaders will just sign off on what has been agreed among the working level officials? What do you think?
Well, that would be one good scenario, but it requires that the working levels actually start meeting and getting down to the nitty-gritty of what goes into a declaration, how would the verification measures be applied, because you actually cannot do denuclearization without a declaration. It is a prerequisite. You have to know what exists so you know what's going to be eliminated. I would prefer that they use the leverage of a date for a summit to get that declaration beforehand, and so we could then move even farther forward on denuclearization. But at a minimum, insisting that the summit must produce a plan for a verifiable declaration, I think that's the minimum that we should accept.
Mr. Maxwell,
yeah.
With the two leaders actually sitting down and coming up with a denuclearization roadmap, what do you think about that?
Well, I don't think that's really possible because, frankly, neither President Trump nor Kim Jong-un are nuclear experts, and really the experts need to do that. I think they could certainly agree on broad principles, perhaps a target date, and the second best case, Ambassador laid out the best case, that we have working level talks. The second best case may be that they have this meeting, establish some principles, a target date, and then allow the working group to meet and work out the details. But like the ambassador, I would prefer that to be done before a second summit.
Now, this week, the leader-to-leader discussion was highlighted by the State Department spokeswoman, and she said that U.S. is now engaged in leader-to-leader discussions and will not repeat past mistakes, and that the past multilateral talks were not effective because so many countries weighed in, she said. So what do you think about how is current approach better than the six-party talks?
Well, I think it's worth trying this top-down approach. And I don't criticize President Trump for agreeing to the Singapore summit. I do criticize him for not using it to leverage far more concrete and unambiguous commitments from Kim Jong-un. So we need to do better the second time if we're going to continue down this path. Multilateral diplomacy, I think, had its value in the past. I'm a little less skeptical than the State Department on that score. What's good about a multilateral approach is it ensures that other stakeholders who might be playing both sides of the street are forced to sing from the same sheet of music, so that you get China and Russia in particular to send the same message as to what Kim Jong-un must do as he's hearing from the United States and from South Korea and from Japan. So I think at some point we need to get a multilateral mechanism to work side by side with the direct U.S.-North Korean bilateral talks. But first we need to get past the starting gates on the actual denuclearization commitments.
And I think this President Trump, President Moon, and Kim Jong-un are really practicing a form of unconventional, experimental, top-down diplomacy. The one real significant benefit that could come out of this, if there is an agreement, it's likely to be signed by the leaders. And in the past, agreements have been signed at lower levels, so the potential that this has the highest level of approval, public approval from the leaders, could cause an agreement to have a better chance of working, because, frankly, none of them have really worked in the past.
Now, Mr. Maxwell, you are in the military, and this week CSIS unveiled satellite imagery analysis on the North Korean missile bases. And President Trump said U.S. fully knows about these bases. So how do you think, how much does the United States know about these military missile facilities in North Korea?
I think we know quite a bit, and I think our intelligence is very good. But I also think we have to consider two things. One is, when we do see North Korea making improvements, it's generally because they want us to know. And so they could be very well sending a signal to us. They know when our reconnaissance is taking place. They certainly know when commercial satellites are flying. And of course, CSIS used commercial imagery to see that. So we have to consider that they're sending a signal. They're showing us what they want us to see. What I'm most concerned about is what we can't see and what are in the tunnels. And those mobile missile launchers that are in the tunnels are the most dangerous. And so that's what I'm really concerned about. I'm not as concerned about missile bases, where they are storing weapons, fueling, conducting maintenance, and the like. Yes, we've known about them, but when they show improvements, they're trying to send a message.
But how about North Korea just coming up with insignificant denuclearization and disarmament steps and continuing these activities at missile bases? What is your take on that?
Well, unfortunately, that seems to be their strategy, is to offer token concessions that are not insignificant. The dismantlement of the missile test site, which is still a work in progress, it's not finished. At least offering to dismantle the Yongbyon facility, if that is something that they carry through on, that would be very significant. But I agree that it's a much more comprehensive program. That's why we need a declaration sooner rather than later, so we know the full scope and also know whether they're concealing something or leaving something off the list. And then we have to have some kind of verification regime which allows either the United States or the international community through one of the agencies to challenge ambiguous information and find out whether there's something hidden in a tunnel or buried underground. So it's a very complex challenge. We need to start getting on with this. And we also need to get to the full scope of denuclearization and not just token gestures.
Now, one media called this a great deception by North Korea, and President Trump rejected this interpretation. What is your take on the allegations that this is a great deception by North Korea?
Well, North Korea is masterful at denial and deception, at camouflage and concealment. But I don't think this was a deception because we see it. And they showed it to us. So I think that it is a deception for some people. They interpret it that way because they're not aware of this information. It hasn't been reported, and so it is news to them. But I think that we have to understand North Korea is constantly making military improvements, particularly in its missile capabilities. I mean, that is its strength, and so they're always going to be improving their military capabilities. And so, to me, it was not deception. Deception is what we don't see. And that's what we have to worry about.
On that military capability, North Korea said that Chairman Kim Jong-un visited the testing of a new tactical weapons test. And the South Korean military thinks this is a long-range artillery. So what would be the impact to the ongoing U.S.-North Korea denuclearization talks?
I think it's a reminder, as Dave just said, that the North Korean program is continuing to move forward with new modernization programs, which are significantly enhancing their capabilities, continuing to pose a real-time threat to South Korea and to U.S. forces in South Korea. And it's a reminder that while there was no deception with respect to these recent satellite photos, the deception may be that they promised to move towards denuclearization, but they're moving in the opposite direction.
So this test of a tactical weapon, is North Korea stepping up pressure against the United States, you think?
Well, I think the United States, yes, I think that is. But again, as we said, it's a continuing development. And of course, artillery, from a conventional military perspective, is a key weapon system for the North. If this is an artillery system, we often say in the military that North Korea is an artillery army supported by a scheme of maneuver. And so it's artillery, of course, that we know in the Quezon Heights that can range Seoul. It's a direct threat to South Korea, a direct conventional threat. And we should keep in mind that the North Korean military forces are postured for offensive operations, while South Korean military forces are postured for the defense. And so if they are increasing their artillery capability, it really sends the message that they are maintaining their offensive capability, which is a direct threat to South Korea and the alliance. And I think it is part of sending a message of pressure to the United States. I mean, North Korea has been masterful at getting something for nothing and using provocations, whether kinetic or through messaging, to gain political and economic concessions. I mean, that's the decades-old playbook that they've used. This may very well be one of those occurrences. I would also say, though, we don't know much about it. And I often wonder what Kim Yo-jong and the Propaganda and Agitation Department are doing, and if this is just something really to cause a reaction from the ROK side, from the U.S. side, or maybe even to drive a wedge between the South Korean and U.S. alliance.
Mm-hmm. Now, Ambassador, if North Korea continues to stall and not come to the negotiating table, do you think the United States will step up even more pressure on North Korea and more sanctions on North Korea?
Well, I certainly think they should. I think we actually were in a much better place before Singapore when the pressure was stronger, when China was at least more compliant with the sanctions than it is today, when Russia, I think, was doing better. I think we've kind of achieved the worst of all possible worlds. We've kind of pretended that the problem is on its way to resolution, and at the same time, we've allowed the sanctions pressure to dissipate, and that's removing the pressure on the North to get serious.
Mm-hmm. Well, we'll end our conversation here and watch video for our next discussion.
Our partnership also includes our pressure campaign regarding North Korea.
This week, Vice President Pence expressed a strong resolve to maintain sanctions and pressure against North Korea in a series of meetings in ASEAN. Now, Vice President Pence has always held a strong stance on North Korea. Do you think he's playing bad cop, or is it his personal views?
Well, I think when Vice President Pence speaks, he's speaking authoritatively for the administration, so I don't think we should dismiss his comments as personal views. I think people should pay attention. He made some important statements on this trip. So I don't think there's a good cop, bad cop routine going on here. But I think the key is, I think he's setting some expectations for a second summit, which is a better approach than we took in the preparations for the Singapore summit.
Mm-hmm. Now, President Trump, Vice President Pence, National Security Advisor Bolton, and Secretary Pompeo, they actually have a slight difference in nuance when it comes to North Korea. So are they creating synergy? Why is there the difference in nuance, do you think?
Well, not being a diplomat or a negotiator, I do think that they may be offering nuanced views to give the North some flexibility. But I think that their views are really synchronized. I think that they have a plan. I think that North Korea should pay attention to what each and every one of them says, particularly Vice President Pence's recent statements, because I think that if the North fails to make that strategic choice, it is not going to be good for them. There will be increased pressure. And so I think that the four senior leaders are in sync, but they offer nuanced views to give some negotiating flexibility to the North.
Mm-hmm. Ambassador, how do you think North Korea is reacting to more hardlined views like National Security Advisor Bolton or Vice President Pence? And do you think North Korea wants to separate President Trump from the more hardline voices?
Mm-hmm. I do think they're trying to drive a wedge between the president and the other administration officials that you mentioned. I think the president continues to talk about how they have all the time in the world to denuclearize, that he's very relaxed about the postponement of the recent visit by Kim Yong-chol. I think that unfortunately gives them a false sense of hope that they can have their cake and eat it too, that the United States will ultimately agree to a deal that maybe reduces the nuclear program, but allows them to have normal relations with the international community, peace treaty, all the benefits, while keeping a few nukes. And I think that is mistaken. I don't think the president is going to, at the end of the day, agree to that. But he may be giving them a sense that if they play hard to get, if they do their usual extravagant rhetoric and insult people, that they'll get new concessions. I don't think it's going to work. I certainly hope it doesn't work, but I think that's their game right now.
You know, the evidence for your comment there about trying to split President Trump from his advisors, you know, we should pay attention to North Korea's rhetoric, even though it is sometimes, you know, very outlandish. But, you know, an example is Ri Yong-ho's speech at the UN General Assembly. I mean, he explicitly said that President Trump should not listen to his advisors and that they're doing him a disservice. So I think that's clear evidence that that Kim Jong-un wants to try to deal directly with President Trump. And he really needs to be disabused of that notion, because I am confident that our senior leaders are in complete synchronization and have the same viewpoint, and Kim Jong-un will fail in that strategy.
At the ASEAN this week, South Korean President Moon Jae-in was very different from Vice President Pence. He was on a campaign to meet with Russia and other ASEAN nations and sought ways to ease sanctions on North Korea. How did you see this?
Well, I think that was frankly a mistake. I think that to the extent that we've made progress over the last year, it's been through the close alignment of U.S. and South Korean positions and being unambiguous about the sanctions. They're based on United Nations Security Council resolutions, and North Korea has to make some tangible steps towards denuclearization to even consider lifting them, at least in whole or in part. So I think South Korea needs to think again about giving signals to North Korea that the sanctions regime is going to be eased without these kinds of concrete moves on denuclearization, and ultimately remove some ambiguity in what's going on the inter-Korean track, where I think the South is pushing the limits on economic projects to the point that some could argue that they're already crossing the line on what's consistent with the sanctions.
Last question, Mr. Maxwell. Just like last month at the Asia-Europe meeting, the leaders of the ASEAN nations, they all called for the fully and finally verified denuclearization of North Korea. What do you think is the concerted message to North Korea from the international community?
I think that there is a united front that North Korea cannot have nuclear weapons. We cannot tolerate that. How we get there is going to be, you know, a difficult path. But I think Kim Jong-un should know that he stands alone by wanting to have nuclear weapons, and that the international community is not going to tolerate that.
We'll have to wrap it up here and move on to our next segment. Now time for the photo moment, time to look at an interesting North Korea picture. Today we have a picture of South Korean military transport aircraft airlifting tangerine to North Korea. South Korea is sending 200 tons of tangerines from Jeju Island in return for North Korea's gift of 2 tons of pine mushrooms. This raised controversy in South Korea over the budget and where the tangerines will reach the intended beneficiaries. North Korea says the tangerines were given to young adults and workers in Pyongyang. David, what's your reaction?
Well, I certainly wish that food could be going to the Korean people outside of Pyongyang. The people in Pyongyang live a good life, and we need to be concerned with the other 25 million Koreans living in the north who are facing stark food shortages as we go into the winter. So while the bright orange tangerines look like a sign of friendship and goodwill, we cannot forget what is happening to the vast majority of the Korean people living in the north.
Ambassador?
Yeah. I agree with that 100%. The problem for many years with humanitarian aid has been the ability to verify that it goes to the people really in need rather than to the elite and the relatively prosperous people in the capital. And it's also, I think, a reminder that there is this gray zone as to what's consistent with sanctions and what's inconsistent that South Korea continues to enter into without fully consulting with the United States and other countries that are trying to help achieve denuclearization. So, one plane load of tangerines isn't going to upset the whole negotiation process, but I think it's another example of where closer coordination would have been useful.
Well, on that note, we'll have to wrap it up here. Ambassador, Mr. Maxwell, thank you for joining us. And this was Washington Talk from the Voice of America, and I'm Eun-jung Cho. Join us next week for more analysis on North Korea.